Okay, so this presentation is on something called arousal non-accordance and the neurobiology of arousal non-accordance and how that relates to the um, meaning of body betrayal and the recovery from trauma-related shame or sexual assault recovery. So the quote up here by the picture with the apple says, "If my mouth waters when I bite into a wormy apple, does anybody say to me, 'You said no, but your body said yes'?" So arousal non-accordance is when our body reacts to sexual stimulus or sexual information, some kind of sexual messaging or sexual information that's coming into our field of awareness, either our physical field, our visual or auditory field. And um, while we may have a mental feeling of disgust or sadness or fear or something like that, even though there's such mental construct, our physical body becomes aroused. So that's what arousal non-accordance is. And it can be confusing, especially when we have learned that our body is a messenger of sorts, and when we're learning that we can trust our body and our body's signals to keep us safe, well, what's happening when that happens? It's almost like a betrayal of our own body. Our body is betraying us, especially if we have experienced this during sexual assault or rape, or sometime when there's unwanted sexual attention or or something to that nature, or unwanted sexual stimulus. So the way that this is understood neurobiologically is that your body reacts because it is automatic nervous system response, meaning similar to our breathing, our heart rate, things like that. It is not a function of our mind or emotions. Now, sexual feelings are stimulated by our mind and emotions too, so that's why it makes it confusing. And on this graph underneath here, you can see um, how that overlaps. So men and women are a little different. So it takes much more genital response and a subjective arousal for men than it takes for women. So very different. So research indicates that while men experience a 50% overlap between physical and mental arousal, women experience only a 10% overlap, illustrating that genital blood flow is not a reliable indicator of consent. So as we know, as you have defined consent is when you are consenting legally and verbally to engage with physical or verbal or emotional sexual activity. And verbal consent is considered the only true consent. So even though your body may react and feel aroused, and you're feeling aroused, and maybe even there's some fluid stimulation there, that doesn't mean that you consent. You can still feel disgust and upset and arousal at the same time. So your body is reacting reflexively, even in traumatic or non-consensual contexts. And sometimes, and that's confusing, and that's why it can lead to shame or self-blame for survivors. Like, why did that feel good at the same time when that was happening, when I didn't want it to be happening? I felt scared and fearful and maybe even disgusted and things, but yet at the same time, it felt good. And so that can be confusing, but just know that it's your body's natural reactivity to any sexual stimulus. And it's an automatic thing, just like breathing, just like needing to go to the bathroom, just like our heart rate. That's of the most our body has a lot of it has a lot of power in that. Now, women have more emotional needs to have arousal happen than men do, as you can see that when the Venn diagram here of the overlap, there's much more overlap in genital response and subjective arousal than women. So it is important for women to have a feeling of safety and emotional connection, to have arousal accordance. So this is important to understand because in the past, legal systems and social systems really, and rape myths didn't have this understanding of neurobiology and the way that sexual arousal works. And so often what would happen was there would be a lot of victim blaming. Next slide. So the dual control model is this is a very detailed way to understand our sexual neurobiology. So I'm just going to go over this quickly. It was proposed by Bancroft and Jansen and popularized by Emily Nagoski, which we'll see her video later. She's a really great speaker and public educator about this issue. So there are two systems. The model poses that sexual response is a balance between excitation and inhibition. So the sexual excitation system, otherwise known as the accelerator, it scans the environment for any stimulus it identifies as sexually relevant. When it detects such a cue, whether it is a touch, a visual, or even a thought, it sends a signal to the body to start the engines of physiological arousal, not mental, and such as increasing genital blood flow. Okay, so that's what starts the automatic nervous system starting to bring blood flow into your genital area and general arousal sensations. The sexual inhibition system, or the brakes, is another system that exists simultaneously with the accelerator. This system monitors the environment for threats, for stressors, reasons to shut down arousal, and it functions to protect the individual by suppressing sexual response when the situation is perceived as unsafe, inappropriate, or unappealing. According to these sources, these two mechanisms are autonomous, meaning a single stimulus can activate both the brake and the accelerator at the same time. That's important. The outcome of a sexual experience depends on the interaction between them. So when you have the brake and accelerator going at the same time, you're still going to experience some arousal, even though the brake is on. Could be. Every situation and person is different in their experience. So healthy sexual encounters, in an ideal scenario, the accelerator is active, meaning there's no brake and the brake is released. And that means that there is a synchronized physical and emotional response of arousal. traumatic or stressful encounters, in situations involving fear, lack of safety, the brake is engaged. However, the accelerator may still be triggered by mechanical touch or sexually relevant cues. This results in arousal non-accordance, where the body shows physical signs of arousal like lubrication or an erection, even though the mind is experiencing terror, disgust, or total lack of consent. Relevance versus appeal. A core tenet of this model is that a stimulus can be sexually relevant, triggering your accelerator and your body's response, without being sexually appealing, which will require the brake to be off. And that's where we go back to that example of the apple. So an apple in and of itself is appealing, but an apple with it's an apple is relevant, right? But an apple with worms is not appealing. So my mouth can still water an automatic response to this relevant stimulus of the apple without it actually being appealing. So because the accelerator can respond to mechanical stimulation via reflex in the spinal cord, physiological arousal is often involuntary and automatic, similar to tickle reflex or mouth watering when biting into the apple. So the tickle reflex is like sometimes you can be tickled and it feels like you're going to laugh and you're going to react in your body to being tickled, right? But sometimes tickling isn't welcome. And so you feel fearful or you feel scared or whatever that is. So the tickle reflex is a similar situation that happens. And we can point out many different examples in the body where automatic nervous system and the response in the body differs from what your emotional and mental reactions are to the situation. And so desire versus arousal. Under this model, desire is defined as a state where the accelerator is all the way activated and the brakes are not interfering at all. That's desire. That's true desire. Genital response alone is not an indicator of desire or even pleasure, or definitely not consent. So pleasure is not equal to arousal. A very important distinction to think about. Okay, so what happens when we've had this happen to us and we're not sure what to do? Well, the first thing is education, just understanding how your body works and taking away the shame or the self-blame is so impactful, especially for someone who has survived sexual assault. Just understanding this as a human, even a human who hasn't experienced sexual assault. Education is extremely powerful to understand ourselves and how our body works in the world. So if you have experienced sexual assault and you feel shame, you prioritize that you have access to safety and you want to establish safety. You want to remember that you have choice and you remember that you can go at your own pace. Your experience is valid and it's good to have that psychoeducation, right? And then we can use things like grounding techniques, other embodied techniques to get us back into being able to get in touch with our bodies, build that trust with our body. Again, rebuild that trust if we feel a sense of body betrayal. Important to re-engage the relationship with our body so that we can trust it again. And so that we can understand it, understand what's going on. So then there's other approaches. And the CBT approach, or just using your mind to reframe the situation. Again, psychoeducation, very important. Self-compassion super important to have self-compassion in all kinds of things. And then EMDR is another way to kind of help uh, take the charge out of a traumatic incident, or take the charge out of the moment where you said, hey, this happened to me, and a person of trust or a person of importance in your life either didn't believe you or dismissed you or invalidated your experience in some way or made you feel unseen or uncared for. So either taking the charge out of the experience itself and the charge out of that memory, and or taking the charge out of the moment where you shared that information with a trusted person and it didn't land in the way that was supportive to you. Okay, so here are some links that we're going to look at in a moment. I just wanted to share these. You can scan with your phone if you're watching this from and you've got a phone, you can scan this. Otherwise, if we're doing this in group, I'm going to go ahead and find these YouTube links in a moment. Again, Emily and Nagoski is a wonderful speaker. If you don't have time to look her up now and you want to learn more about sexual non-accordance, arousal non-accordance, you can follow her links. And here are some resources and research that to support all of what we have been talking about today. So fairly new research, good to follow research and spread the information, tell your friends, tell people that you know that this might help them understand more about their body and decrease shame and guilt, and empower people to feel okay about themselves even when these things have happened to them, and they can find a sense of safety and rebuild trust in their own internal experiences. Okay, thank you.